All right, our next step really is to do the reconstruction phase. I only dropped a sphere on there so that you could really just see how multiple mapping is going to work. The reconstruction phase would be taking something and applying. I could further deconstruct things and then reconstruct using something else. So even though technically I got rid of the sphere, you guys can delete that. Even though technically the surface is already deconstructed, the surface has a couple of components that I can further deconstruct. So while my grid can be broken out into surfaces and points, I can take my surfaces and break it down into planes, lines or edges or curves, and points. And this is a tool that you're going to use with me relentlessly. So get well acquainted with it. It's under Surface Analysis, and it's called Deconstruct BREP. Did I explain what a BREP is?
I think so, but I don't really.
So a BREP is called a boundary representation. It's sort of like in Rhino, you have things that are solid that act as solid but aren't really solid in terms of their mathematical properties and what you can do to modify them. A BREP is sort of kind of like that, right? It can act as solid. It can act as a surface, kind of like that. So anyway, with the deconstruct BREP, let me put it in here. Oops. Get my. Yeah. With the deconstruct BREP, if I plug the surfaces in, I'm going to get an output, right? So the BREP that goes in, like I said, it can act as a solid, it can act as a surface. So if I plug a surface into it, it should read it. So that's what it did. What I get is a breakout of other components that I can use to make geometry. So I've got faces, which are really just all of the surfaces recreated again. I have edges. Those are just the curves that define the edges of the surface. And then I have the vertices, or essentially the points at the end, the endpoints of each of the lines. Okay, so for argument's sake, I'm going to move from deconstruction into reconstruction first. Then we're going to look at the actual information and how it's structured. But the reconstruction phase is, let's say this is a facade system, and I'm going to do this very simply with just pipes. Let's say it's like a curtain wall. Okay, curtain wall is made up of mullions. There really aren't any here. You guys need to see it? You probably do. Somebody does. Curtain walls look like this, right? They're made up of glass panels that are situated within aluminum extrusions known as mullions, usually aluminum. And they're not always that. Sometimes they're glass like that. But anyway, I digress. Back here, let's say we're trying to situate these panels within a mullion system, otherwise known as a curtain wall or storefront. I'm going to simplify it and just use pipes because they pretty much just map to an edge very cleanly, and it gives you the idea of what the reconstruction phase is. So if I go to surface and freeform, I can use this one that's called pipe, and it's going to request some information from me to create pipes. It will ask for the base curve, which is essentially the curves that the pipe is going to be extruded along. And it'll ask for the radius of the pipe, or multiple radiuses, and then the type of caps. So that basically means at the end, is it just going to stop? Is it going to cap it off with a little flat edge, or is it going to round it off with, so it looks like the end of a candy cane or whatever you call it. So really, at a very base level, because the pipe radius is numerical. It also has a default value of 1. And the selection at the end, this E value, that's really just a toggle between 0, 1, or 2. You technically only need to provide the edges or curves in order to create pipes along it. But remember that the default radius is 1, and that's pretty thick because I think my cell size right now is only like 3 in the width direction. So what I'm going to do is change that to a smaller value. I'll make a slider that goes from 0 to 0.55 to 1. The reason I did 0.55 is because then that automatically sets up my slider to have 2 decimal places. And I'll plug that into radius. Now it gets a little smaller. I can move it down, make it a little more fine. And then at the end, this is the E piece. So I can create a numerical input that's going to change how that actually terminates. So I'll just use a panel. You guys know I like to use panels for my static numbers. And I read the instructions. 0 is no cap, that's what it is now. 1 is flat, 2 is round. So I'm just going to round it out with a 2. Plug that in. Now it's rounded. So these are the additive components that I just put in. The result is a complete, I guess you could call it structure. But if you want to see it, right, you guys are beginning to be familiar now with turning things on and off. When you're generating geometry, it's really not so simple as grabbing one component and turning it off. You have to grab all of the components from the previous string of that definition and turn them off if you don't want to see them. So the deconstruct brep, that's my panels within. I don't need to see that. I can turn that off. But I also have the surfaces that I extrapolated from the rectangular grid. I don't want to see those, so I turn them off. And technically I could turn this off as well, and I will. So what that leaves me with is a construct. So let me walk you through this again as a recap. What we've done in order to create this mullion sort of system is we've constructed a geometry, the rectangular grid. We kind of sort of secondarily deconstructed it into surfaces, then deconstructed it further into edges. And then we reconstructed those edges into pipes. Okay? So with that said, that is essentially the mindset that you should be in at all times while you're creating and designing geometry in Grasshopper. Construct, deconstruct, reconstruct. And it happens tens, if not hundreds of times throughout your very complex modeling exercises. What questions do you have? All good? Okay, cool. There's one more thing I want to do here with you guys on this tonight, but I'm just going to make sure that you're all here before I move on.